Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Leitner? Here. Commissioner Walls? Commissioner Rice?
Present.
Commissioner Duckham?
Here.
Commissioner Alexander?
Present.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Here.
Commissioner Placzek?
Here.
Commissioner Elwell?
Here.
Chairman Shotwell?
Here.
Present.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
First opportunity for public comment. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, the oil lease. Mr. Overton.
Thank you. I'm not looking for any action today, but I did want to put it on here since it is a new lease. It's the JDOT property out, the Clark Lake property out there. We own a little over 17 acres, and Savoy has been leasing all the properties in the area, and I guess we're one of the last on the list to lease there. So I've been told we're probably one of the smaller properties there. But the lease is a 3-year lease, basically $50 an acre, so a little over $800 up front. And then there's one 2-year option on the lease at the end of the 3 years. They can execute if they so choose. And of course, the lease is standard as far as percentage of oil royalties and so forth. Phil Curtis has reviewed it and to form and function, and therefore it's fine. Again, not asking for any, we'll take it through the regular process, committee and full board, but it only generates, unless they actually start pumping oil, roughly, $900? Questions?
I don't believe this is on Jefferson Road, is it? Isn't it on Clark Lake Road?
Yeah.
The county garage in Clark Lake Road, I
I've
think.
got a map in the machine here too.
Just for Columbia Township. Make sure I knew where it was.
It's Napoleon. Yeah, I've got a map from GIS online. It's Clark Lake. I went out there and looked at it with Christopher. The bulk of the property is utilized by us with either some stone or buildings or otherwise, and Savoy has indicated they do not anticipate putting an oil well there by any means. It's just they want to lock on all the properties. There's lots of vacant property around our property that they would use if there was that kind of oil underneath that particular spot. Other questions, concerns, or otherwise? Yes, Commissioner.
Do you have any idea how this dollar amount compares to other leases that were given in the area?
Yeah, we discussed that quite a bit, and what I've been told, at least, is that it's the same. In fact, we've been sitting on this for a little while now, for a few months, basically kind of going back and forth with Savoy, basically kind of pushing them a little bit, because at the end of the day, it's not even $1,000 to the county. Thus far, they've been more trouble than they're worth having a conversation, not to denigrate Savoy, but in my conversations with them as of last few months at least. So, I don't want to say we've been using necessarily a negotiating tactic by delay, but on the other hand, I've said, hey, that's not good enough. You need to up the price. And then they started sending me, talking about what the comparables were and the market. And then I had that same conversation with Phil Curtis, and he agrees. Let's put it that way.
Thank you for the information.
Seeing none, this will be a committee, and then from there on to the full board. Am I going to run?
switch me over to laptop mic? There we go. Let's see. Thanks, sir. So during the budget process, we talked about the cost of 911, of delivering that service, and the amount to which we were subsidizing it from the general fund. And the budget was predicated upon us increasing that fee to a serviceable level and to one that could sustain our 911 program independently, which would prevent it, shield it somewhat from changes in the real estate market, which is what our millages are based upon. So this is the time to come back and to take action on it if we intend to, if the board intends to put that ballot measure to vote in May.
Are you looking for action today?
No, just this month. So this is, this will go through the committee process and then on to the full board meeting in January.
Clarification, you say in regard to the budget, are we talking about the 2016 budget or the 2017 budget for clarification?
We're talking about the 2016 and 17 budget. Both years had programmed income from the revenue increase that this board passed. And I'll touch on that. I just have a few slides to show you today. I dropped one in that I'll, just a little bit ago, that I'll add to board docs for you to see. It's something you've seen before, but I thought it was germane to the conversation. So the goal for 911 is for it to be self-sufficient with revenues that come in and not to be supported by the general fund. That would be the administrator's office goal. Also to fund it at what we term a serviceable level. We've talked before about how slim we are, and I'll go through those numbers. Also, the amount of support that it gets right now that's not being paid for from the general fund services. Because what we would do if this fee was approved successfully is transfer that to its own fund where it would stand alone, and they would pay for the cost of IT and facilities and finance, HR, stuff like that, indirect costs. Also, this has to do with keeping up with the infrastructure radio, which we're really not sustainable right now in being able to fund it at the level we are and keep up with the technology, because this is a technology-dependent service, and the technology will only grow from here. So, and the support that requires. So right now we have Lieutenant Hammond, who's over 911, and they have 19 communication technicians that run three shifts a day. And they've had some challenges lately with some people out, so it's cost. We've been paying a lot of overtime of recent. What we talked about with the board during the budget process in August and September was adding 3 more working supervisors to the 911 program. And in talking with the sheriff's office, we believe that would help with the workload and to keep it up to a serviceable level. So these would be communication technicians that were working supervisors. They would be on a desk, be able to take calls, and but also at the same time, when the lieutenant in charge is not there, they would be the go-to person on site. Right now, basically, you have 1 shift a day that's covered on by supervision. So, and this is the chart I dropped in that I'll add to board docs so you can have it. But it shows our cost per call. This came from the ad hoc committee report last January. Just a little over a year ago. So it's 2014 data we're looking at, but you can see this is data submitted to the state. So it comes with whatever data collection flaws that are inherent to that instrument. But you can see our expenditures in 2014 were almost $1.7 million, and our call volume was 134,000. So if you look at that, a cost per call, we're at $12.62 a call versus the next highest comparable is at $18.45, and that's our neighbor to the south, Lenawee. So even if there is some discrepancy in the data collection tool, there's enough distance there to know that we're doing things really efficient or just cheap. So we don't want to be the cheap. We want to be efficient, but we don't want to be in the cheap realm because that leaves us only one incident away from being exposed to our staffing weaknesses. So that's one of the reasons we're bringing this before you now and in the past budget. So we have a new facility, which is nice. It's nice to be in something new with new equipment, new desks, new walls and electric and everything. But that facility is going to depreciate over time. It has to be maintained just like every other facility that we've had. So there's not going to be any costs many costs as part of the facility in the coming years, but surely in the next 5 to 20 years, we have to think about keeping that facility up to date. It will require updates and upkeep. The capital plan that was submitted by the Sheriff's Office to maintain the current radio system requires 2 more antennas during the 5-year plan, and those antennas are estimated to cost about $330,000 per tower. With the existing radio system, that would protect us or keep us covered. At least that's what the current thought is for the narrow banding that might occur in the near future. But in addition to those radio towers, you're always going to need to have maintenance and updating for other radio infrastructure needs. And of course, we have an ad hoc committee now looking at a comparable radio system. In the best case or worst case scenario, that might save us some money, and it may not be. We may not need that $330,000, but there is maintenance costs and startup costs that are included into that switching around. So there's still an infrastructure need and a staffing need with 911 that can't be met under the current funding structure.
Adam, these new towers, basically is the cost erecting the towers and buying the mechanical parts of it. If we should switch to 800 radio as an example, is it as simple as replacing a VHF transmitter at the top and putting an 800? So we wouldn't waste our money on one if we switch to the other?
Well, I'll invite Lieutenant Hammond to come up and answer that if he wants to, but not like put him on the spot, but that amount is to cover the actual cost of erecting the tower and hooking it up to our system. Whether we need additional towers under the 800 is something we have to do through the study. So.
Correct, but our current towers, could they be usable?
Towers, just to clarify, the towers run usually about $100,000. All the other equipment that is populated with each tower, that's the additional cost, about $250,000 per site. Slightly more for 800 megahertz, but Adam's right. We may have to build out on the 800 megahertz system, which would still be the same or similar costs. But it's not just the tower itself, but it's all the equipment, the transmitters, all the...
So the existing towers, we just change the equipment on them if we switch to a different radio system, and they're still usable?
The towers themselves, I guess.
Yeah, thank you.
The only thing is that the 800 megahertz may create different blind spots than we have now based on and that has to be done determined through the study of the frequency study.
Well, I just wanted to make a point too. I listened to the conversation, and the fact is that it was, I think, 10 or 11 years ago, I think the sheriff took part in it when they did the test of the state's 800 system, and I think since that time we've got one more tower in the county, but I think at that time, the worst coverage was 93%. We are going to test the state system again in the county in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And there's a number of chiefs that are hopeful that we can also test our current system side by side at the same time. Because I think what we're going to find is that we'll be lucky if we have the same coverage with the 800 system versus what we have now. But I think one thing that we need to understand is that although we may have coverage with the current system, being able to hear the radios isn't always the same. With a state system, if you have coverage, it's as clear as having the conversation sitting here with someone next to you. With our current system, that's not the case, and all you have to do is listen to our radio system to hear it. But when you talk about the 330,000, that's per tower, and I know it's an estimate, but you can see that they're talking about 2 of them, and I think those things are worth mentioning. So.
Yeah.
Just to make a comment there in regard to the test upcoming here. I don't know if something has changed, but my last conversation with the state, they were pretty adamant that they wouldn't allow us to test both systems at the same time. Or are we making a...
I don't know that they said we weren't allowed to. They said they would have no part in doing that. That's not their responsibility.
Well, yeah, that's a better
Right.
way of saying it. Yeah, correct.
But the push, in the conversation really from some of the chiefs is, why not just have another person in a car with one of our radios and test our system at the same time?
Yeah, I did ask about, and you know, from their perspective, it just adds to the time, and it already is a long, hard way to go. I'm a fan of testing them both at the same time, but I think we're going to have to somehow convince the state to agree.
Well, maybe we can test it another way, but I can tell you what I see happening is it being steered away from doing a side-by-side comparison of the 2 systems. And I am not going to be supportive of continuing to dump money into this system that we have. You know, we have a chance to go with a state system. We'll see what the test brings. But when we hand it over to them, we're handing over everything. All the maintenance of the antennas that we have and lightning strikes and power and everything else, all that goes to the state and we're done with it. And I think we'll have just as good or better coverage. But I'm fearful that we're being steered in a direction, and I personally don't want to have later say you have 93 or 94% coverage with a state system and we don't really know what we have with our own system. There's been conversation about how the state radio is not going to work in the middle of the MAC plant. No, it won't, but our current system doesn't either, and we're not going to know that if we don't do a side-by-side comparison. So I sit here with a lot of anticipation about where we're going with this.
Yeah, I don't mean to infer that we shouldn't. I just want to make clear that the state wasn't willing participants, at least at this point, in that. I think, you know, I mean, if it comes down to it, I suppose we could have another vehicle following the other vehicle and testing the other system or some means if chiefs are doing it. Okay, thank you. Mr. Brown, if you can continue.
Yeah, police are good at following people, so. So the calculations behind this fee that we've arrived at includes technology and support, software, hardware, equipment, IT support. It also includes a township incentive program. This would be a grant to local police or fire agencies. At the end of the year, we'd say these are unused funds. These problems exist regardless of the radio system. And that is, we provided these local law enforcement and fire agencies with equipment over 10 years ago, and that equipment is running to the end of its life cycle and needs to be replaced. That burden could be entirely shifted over to them, which a lot of it they're probably bearing now, but surely this part of this program, including some of that funding from the 911 fees for local law enforcement and fire agencies to be able to update their equipment, is important too, and it's important to them. So we tried to include that in in our calculation of where this fee needs to be set at. So currently, our fee is at 44 cents per line per month for phone and mobile lines. The state average for counties without a surcharge is $1.33, and that's for counties that don't have any millage too. I believe I should have wrote it down, but I think there's 8 or 9 counties that have a dedicated millage just for 911, which we're not proposing. But we believe to fully fund it at the serviceable level, that is adding those 3 supervisory positions, having a township incentive program, being able to cover the indirect cost and technology updates, we believe it needs to be at $1.50 per line per month. We could partially subsidize it under an alternate plan. This is what we showed you in the budget at $1.29, but that likely would not include the township program. It would not include covering our indirect costs. So it's just another option, but not wouldn't cover all those things we've talked about thus far. Again, this is a sheet that was in our budget presentation. Going back to Commissioner Alexander's question, in 2016, we had budgeted to use $640,000 from revenue collected July 1 through the end of the year from this fee approved. And then in 2017, that would be $1 million of revenue, just over $1 million. So even with those things, with those fee increases, we're still going to be at a fund balance over and above our 24% of only $200,000, which is a pretty slim margin on a $46 million budget. The deadline, that really wraps up the presentation, but the deadline is on February 9th, I believe, to notify the clerk that we want this on the ballot. That means that you'd have to take action in January or at the very worst case in our study session in February to make sure that gets on the ballot for May. It has to be on the ballot in May, and then the telecom industry or agencies have to be notified by May 15th in order to start collecting the revenue by July 1. So they need time to get it into their billing systems. And the state set that time at May 15th. So, with that, at your pleasure for any questions.
Well, you answered one of them, Madam. I was going to ask when the latest we can vote on. I was of the belief that we had until February to decide this, and I didn't think we were going to decide it until then. And I had a conversation with the administrator yesterday and told him I thought we were putting the cart in front of the horse again with not knowing for sure, about 911, if our talks are dead with Lenawee County, and more importantly, on the radio system. I didn't like that we've been talking about this presentation and it continues to have the allocation or the plan of putting 2 towers up, and we don't know if that's going to happen. We haven't even tested the state system yet, so we don't know which system we're going to, and that's where I think we're putting the cart in front of the horse. I was a little uncomfortable at budget time when we approved the budget, planning on this money when we hadn't even decided if it was going on the ballot yet, much less if the people were going to vote for it. So I continue to have apprehensions about that, and I'm choosing my words carefully because I don't want to speak any words that would jeopardize the potential surcharge fee. I will have quiet conversations with people later, but I've got a lot of concerns with it about 911 and about the overtime being worked there and how much the employees are being worked. And I don't necessarily think that throwing more at it is the answer. But the radio system is my main concern right now, and I'm hopeful that we can make a good decision in the long-term interest of the county for both this and the radio system. Thank you.
My question is regarding the township participation component of this. So when we look at the slide presentation, we see that 21 cents would be added per phone line per monthly fee, correct? To add the township participation component. Am I correct so far?
That includes also that's not all the township percentage program or township incentive program. That's also some indirect costs that we would cut out and continue to bear by the general fund.
Okay, and I also heard you to say that whatever funds are available to be used, grants would be given to townships. So we can then make an assumption, everyone applying for a grant may not receive a grant. We could make that assumption based on the funds available. Are you looking at a committee that would decide or determine, or how would you go about making those decisions as to how those funds would be allocated?
Yeah, we met with the sheriff, I guess it must have been back in August when we were putting this together. And the idea was a committee, actually, to review those and to see. Now, one year we may, like a year that if, in fact, we have to put a tower under that, so then there may be less money that year. But then the next year, where we're not putting up a tower, if we have a fixed cost under the 800 megahertz system where we're just paying a per line cost, then that's a little bit more known amount about how much we have to offer to local units. So that's why it's going to, but yeah, committee system is what was anticipated and talked about.
And would presentation be, or would representation be therefore then from either the fire chief, that local fire chief, and/or township representative, elected officials?
Yeah, we could design it however we wanted to, but you could put local fire and law enforcement on it. You could put commissioners on it. The
Because
sheriff's
I think
department.
where I'm coming from is a commissioner who represents 4 townships. Anytime we put something in place, and not everyone's going to get what they want when they want, but yet they're paying for it,
Yeah.
that's when concerns.
And those are much
Valid.
better situations to have a committee decision than to put that burden on one person or one entity.
Thank you.
I think I'm glad you brought that up, Julie. I was going to leave it, but you brought it up, so I'll speak for a second. I think there's a better way to do that. I think it's a cluster to expect a committee to make fair decisions about that. And if you think back to the history of it, all the townships and the city, I think, gave up their 911 fees and let the county collect them for the operation and equipment for 911. And I think there kind of is a general expectation from most outside agencies that things that are allowable through the 911 fees, such as MDCs and radio, should be bought by the 911 fees for the agencies in the county. That's what I believe. When we talk about 10 years ago, there was I think a radio grant, Sheriff knows it better than I, that they got, and they did give radios out, portable radios, I don't know about mobiles maybe, to most agencies, but that was a grant one-time thing as I recall. And all you have to do is look at the law to see what's allowable to be paid for with 911 fees, and you find that communications equipment is. If you think about it, we're running the dispatch center and we're providing emergency services throughout the county. The radios and the MDCs are a means to dispatch those calls and communicate on them. And I think there's an expectation that those things probably should be paid from 911 fees. It shouldn't have to be agencies come with hat in hand hoping that they're one of the ones that are going to get a grant. I think that should just be a basic expectation of how it should be.
Thanks for the presentation, Adam. Correct me if I'm wrong, the study that we had done in regards to this, it mentioned the amount of people power, I'll call it that, not manpower, people power, that the 911 system would need. If I'm correct, wasn't their suggestion even higher than what we have here?
Yeah, I did the math on that yesterday, and according to their recommendations, if we break out us as a percentage of the whole, their recommendation of staffing level was 31 to 36 and a half FTEs to run just Jackson County. We believe that's high. That's based on national averages, and if you're shooting for average, then that would be your mark. But we believe we can be more efficient at it, but we're still acknowledging that we're short-staffed right now, and we need more people.
Okay, so we'd be going against the study, but we believe that we can maintain the efficiency that they suggested with less. Is that what you're saying?
That's been our conversation with the Sheriff's Department and talking about what staffing level we could operate at successfully.
Okay. One other thing I'd like to comment on, and this has been consistent with me anyway, and I've mentioned this before, and again, I don't know what's ultimately going to happen, but once again, I'm on several committees with a couple of Lenawee County commissioners, and just as recently as last month's meetings, they were pretty emphatic that they're not going to be participating with us with this 911 system. Now, I suppose those commissioners could be wrong, but that's the information they shared with me. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Kind of dovetailing into what Commissioner Elwell was saying about issuing radios to all the out-county service areas or emergency dispatch type people. This does not cover that. That'd be in line for a grant, correct? Not everybody could come at once.
There's money built into what was designed as the 5-year plan for 911, which acknowledging was based on maintaining the current system, which is probably a worst-case scenario. But built into that funding plan was money for local law enforcement, fire agencies to update equipment. What we're saying, though, is that the amount of that may vary year to year based on the needs of 911, the radio infrastructure. But we've built in money that's not currently there. I mean, if we were to try to do that now, there's no money for us to be able to use 911 money, fees for local agencies to update equipment.
Okay, so
Without
my
compromising.
question then, going to go to this next is, let's just say we change the radio system, and I'm not saying even to what. Everybody would need new equipment, but we don't have it built into this cost if everybody needed new equipment. Or if we went with an enhanced VHF system like we have, some townships would be able to get the newer equipment now, others might have to wait till next year. In which case, the change we make to VHF might make, I mean, I guess it's a possibility, make their services deteriorate. So we got some with very good radio service and some that maybe have worse. I'm just wondering, I hate new taxes, but I'm just wondering if this is enough. I mean, I would like everybody to have, all emergency responders to have equal equipment, and it would take a few years to get there with the $1.50 surcharge.
Yeah. The point I think it's important for me to stress today is that the radio is just one piece of the bigger picture,
Correct.
which includes the facility, the staffing of it, and radio costs are going to be a significant part of it either way we go. And the board has an ad hoc committee that's looking at the state system versus our current system. And we have some idea of the startup costs for that, but not enough to come before you and say, here it is. The fee that we've come up with is going to be able to, we believe will be enough to cover both systems, either or system.
Okay.
From what, I hesitate to say this, but from what we know now, the system that we have now is probably would be the more expensive one to cost, if in fact the service quality was the same. It comes out to me. That's based on the numbers that the state's provided us on the cost of radios. There's an assumption in there that the current coverage would be sufficient, which we won't know until we do the study. But from the last meeting that I attended and the costs that they threw out, that was what I took away from it.
if I can interject something here, Bill. Since we're going down this road of talking about the state system, let's assume, as you said, that maybe the state's current system right now will work good enough. And again, the sheriff can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 93% coverage last time it was tested. And assuming that maybe we have that same coverage with our current system, and that's what we move to, if we don't have to put any more towers in, which, if it's 93% coverage, it is what it is. There's no other cost to us with the state. We buy radios, you pay a one-time mic fee of $200, and you're done. We don't have to maintain any towers. Lightning hits, it's not on us, it's on the state. So I can't fathom that it would be more expensive to go to the state system if we make the assumption that how they have the current tower set up is good enough to work for us now, which I think it may be. And I think it's probably equal to what we have. So I think it would be far cheaper if we're going to have to buy radios. You know, most agencies are buying radios all the time, one or two at a time. I think the sheriff has spoken, or the undersheriff has, that in the next few years you have to upgrade radios. We're going to have to buy radios anyway. The state just changed the mic fee. It used to be $250, I think, per year for every single radio that you had to pay the state. They just changed that. You pay $200 to them one time for each radio, and then you're done. There's no other fees to them for maintenance of towers or anything else.
And you're operating on the same information that I had. The one unknown, I think you'll agree, that came up in the last meeting was that if there is a need for an additional tower, the state isn't, at least in the past, they said they haven't been interested in building it themselves, that we would bear that cost burden. I think they did make some caveats to that alluded there was maybe a shadow of or a glimmer of hope that they might take it over, but that was the unknown.
And Adam, they went on to explain to me afterwards in a conversation I had that it's been that way forever because of the bonding that the state did when they built the original towers. Those towers are all paid off, the bonds are all paid off, and the state may not be locked into that. But again, that's assuming the worst case scenario that we need another tower or more. But the benefit to the system as the state system is you used all the towers around you, and there's towers all around us. They're in Ingham, Calhoun, Washtenaw, Lenawee, Hillsdale. And I think if we had to put a tower up, I think if we gave serious thought to that, we could talk with the state and maybe convince them to take a tower after it's been upgraded to their standards, which we could do, and then hand it off to them.
Anyone else? I had a couple comments I'd make. One, I would concur with Commissioner Elwell in the sense that it would be nice if we had more time, but frankly, there's a cost to associated more time. And given the challenges we have with our budget, and the fact that we've built new revenue into our budget, predicated on a successful ballot measure, puts us in a position where we really do need to make a decision. At latest, I think it would be the study session in February. Ideally, I'd like to see it, the end of the month here, at this round. But if push come to shove, the study session there to make the May ballot measure. As Phil indicated, in regard to radios, we could be in a situation where perhaps not everyone has adequate radios or radios that are, fully functional or whatever the case may be, because the revenue on any particular year won't cover that. Well, while that may be the case, that would not be acceptable, at least not in my eyes. I mean, the bottom line is if we were going to make a transition, an upgrade or something that is going to hurt the coverage, in the county, it would be incumbent upon us to borrow the money to make sure we have the purchases, the radios for everybody to use, and then use the revenue we receive annually to pay off that debt. That you wouldn't say, oh, well, when we get to you, you can have radios. We would need to do that up front and pay it back over time. As for the big elephant in the room that we haven't, addressed, and it's a little premature, is, our study that, with Lenawee. And I would tell you that there are real savings to be had in a relationship with Lenawee County in 911. Whether that will materialize or not is truly yet to be determined. I think as not all commissioners are on the same page in regard to that, here or there, I suspect. But nonetheless, we, administration, are having conversations with their administration. We're talking back and forth the numbers, the math, and we are talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings. But at the same time, it has to work well for both parties, be it both financially as well as politically. So there's a lot of folks in the mix. So we'll continue to work on that, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about that real soon with, to just lay out the numbers and say, here's the numbers, and frankly, it's either a go or not a go. So you'll be hearing from us on that. Yeah, yes, sir.
Well, you just made a comment. I guess I'd like to know, sounded like it was your pleasure that we go through this process in regards to the surcharge this go-around this month. Am I correct?
Yes.
So, I mean, we have 8 commissioners here, and yet we're also talking about potentially February. My question is, are we going to do it this month? What's the pleasure of 8 commissioners as opposed to doing it now or February? Or maybe I could ask the chairman that.
Well, first, this is a study session, so it's only discussion. I realize we sometimes do actionable items at the beginning of the meeting. I would recommend that we let it go through the process, and if the commission so deems it appropriate on Tuesday night, we can postpone the vote to the study session in February. But I think we should continue to follow the administrator's recommendation in the process. Now, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered here. Commissioner Elwell brought up the fact that there's a one-time fee with the state, but previously there was a MIC fee that was annually. If things change in Lansing and finances change up there, they very easily could reinstate that MIC fee. We all know that. We've had to deal with the burden of the way the state has manipulated their budget year after year after year after year. And we look at different controls and things that we feel are in place that we could count on, and then all of a sudden, I look at the state liquor fee, they redid the math on it, and came to the conclusion that we get less money and other counties get more money. So, and they didn't compensate us in any way for that. I look at some different funding structures that are out there, and I see some government organizations getting money given to them at a greater rate than what their constitutional or statutory dollars are at. But counties continue to have to deal with the burden of passed down costs and pass-through costs at the state level. So I need to really understand what's going to be involved in the 800 megahertz system or the state system, and if there really is a true savings to us. Now, I know there's a true savings when you consolidate services. You convince 2 counties to get together, we're going to save money. We get a 3rd county involved, we're going to save money. With the technology that's out there today and the answering services and that type of stuff, where a person is actually sending the fire trucks is not as important as do they have the technology to be able to send the fire trucks to the correct address. That's more of a worry to me than it is whether or not the person's sitting in Jackson County or the person's sitting in Hillsdale County or Lenawee County. And I just think that we need to let the process work through. We have the mechanisms within our policies to delay action if we so deem appropriate. We also have the opportunity to delay action to the August ballot if we so deem appropriate. But we know what financial constraints that'll mean to the budget. And at the end of the day, Mr. Overton and Mr. Brown will sit down and figure it out. Because we are the ones that make the policy decision, and we ask them to come back with their recommendations. And sometimes we agree with them, and sometimes we don't. So I think that we should just let the process play itself out.
So the plan is it goes through committee Tuesday, right? Okay.
One thing I would like to point out, and it's to my belief, if we chose the $1.50 per line 911 fee, and after everything was in place and implemented, we found out that we only needed $1.33 of it. We, by vote of the board, could roll that back. However, if we found out we needed $1.65 instead of $1.50, we're going to have to go through the whole process all over again, another vote and everything. So I'd rather take the $1.50 if that's truly the upper level of what we believe we would need. I'm not looking for any more than we need. And then roll it back if it proved that was, we didn't actually need it, then take it back off. And that is, to my understanding, how it works. We can lower it by vote of the board, but we only raise it by vote of the people on the ballot. So I would recommend the $1.50 and then give back something if we don't need it. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments in regard to this item? Seeing, hearing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Next on the schedule here is mutual aid box alarm system. I believe we have the sheriff to speak on that. Good morning.
I will just give you the down and dirty. I know some of you have already communicated with my office about this proposal. I'll let Chief McEldowney, who most of you are familiar with, speak more about the specifics of it. I will say it's a project I'm supportive of. The box alarm system is something that the fire chiefs have been working together for several years and have tried to put together to speed the response times. It's based on more of a closest car or closest unit concept. They have a mutual aid system currently in place now. As it pertains to this system, though, I guess the biggest issue I have is there's two options available to us. We could do a flip card type system to accommodate this, and that would be cheap, free really, and take some amount of training and learning, or we could purchase a package from our vendor who currently operates or runs our computer-aided dispatch system, which would make it a little bit more foolproof, less prone to human error, and less burden on 911 staff, which, as Adam already highlighted, pretty busy already. So my recommendation, the cost of the product is just shy of $20,000. The fire chiefs got together and basically spent or have committed all of the money that they have available to them countywide in their association, which is near $5,000, which would pay for about a quarter of the cost. The remaining cost would be the burden of the county through surcharge money. We do have money available in the surcharge fund to fund the project. Ongoing maintenance is somewhere in the order of $4,800 per year, which is not significant when you look at the size of the budget. So I guess it's my recommendation that maybe we listen to Chief McEldowney, listen to what he has to say about the product or the proposal, and then I'm open to any questions that you may have of me.
Sheriff, the simple version of this, I guess, or explanation is if a fire department's on a fire scene, they need mutual aid, they don't have to think about which station is closest to them. They just tell dispatch what they need, and then the box alarm system automatically hits the one that's closest. Is that?
The way it's supposed to work, and Tim, feel free to jump in if you'd like, but yes, it's very much, I use a classic example. Actually, Tim has used it before too. I had a house fire just around the corner from me on Sears Road, and Spring Arbor was the first dispatch, but it was in the farthest reaches of Spring Arbor. So Summit would actually have been closer. They could have been to the fire before Spring Arbor ever got there, and the mutual aid box alarm system, it would send both units based on proximity more so than whatever agreements you have. So, and I think all the township supervisors are in agreement with this system. They favor it and like what they see.
Yeah, two fire chiefs I talked to, they said when you're on a fire scene, the last thing you want to think about is geography of who's closest. Just be able to call for what you need and they send it, so.
Well, and it's predetermined too, so that I don't want the dispatchers making the decisions like you talked about. I don't want them making the decision who to send. It's all predetermined based on whatever parameters are set up by the individual agencies. So, yes.
Are any of these systems that are set up, do they work outside of the county? Because or this only here is for us, Jackson County.
This is just for
I understand
Jackson County.
But elsewhere?
But I would presume that Sheridan Township and probably Cambridge or wherever other mutual aid spots we have, probably, I'm guessing, there would be some coordination for the fringes around Jackson County. I'm just making that assumption.
Do we know if any of them have the box alarm systems up? No?
They do. Lenawee County is operating in the MABUS capacity right now. They are a MABUS county recognized by the state of Michigan. MABUS is really a resource management tool to better utilize our resources that we have available to us. As you're well aware, the fire service is not immune to the same problems that's happening on all levels of government. We have monetary issues that we're dealing with. Fire departments are normally the most expensive item in a township fire budget or a township budget. But we also have a manpower issue. For the paid-on-call departments, my manpower in Spring Arbor Township changes drastically about 5 o'clock in the morning until about 5 o'clock at night, because most of my paid-on-call firefighters go off to work somewhere outside of the community of Spring Arbor Township. That's when we're most vulnerable. That's when we need a system in place to help rally the resources of 3, 4, and a lot of times, if you're listening, there'll be up to 5 townships that are responding to a single-family residential structure fire. When I got in the fire service 25 years ago, it was frowned upon to even call your neighbor to admit your weakness, that you couldn't handle the fire by yourself. Those days are gone. We no longer have that luxury in the fire service. So this MABUS is a management system that was put in place down in the city of Chicago is where it started. And it's kind of radiated out over the years, and it's fairly new to the Michigan concept, but there's really 3 levels inside the MABUS. And I won't bore you too much, but the local, meaning Jackson County, then it's an organization of resources within our region. If Jackson County was asked to respond to one of our regional partners, whether that's Lansing, called for a request, which they did last summer, this gives us some organization on how Jackson would be able to go up and assist Lansing. And then the next component is on a state level, what resources are available at a state level for Jackson to supply, and then all the way out to national, which is pretty far out there, pretty low likelihood. But it puts a system in place to organize resources and better utilize them. That's what the whole core of MABUS is. And it takes those decisions and allows you to do some pre-planning for a fire situation, whether it's set up geographically inside your jurisdiction, or it could be specific to an address. 151 2nd Street in Spring Arbor Township is Arbor Manor Nursing Home. A fire response there is drastically different, or my resources needed is drastically different compared to 2100 Chapel, my residence. So this allows you, and the system that we're looking at purchasing allows you to set up a system for an automatic response per a address. It could be as specific as an address. It could be a regional response, meaning the southwest corner of Spring Arbor Township would bring in Pulaski, where the northeast corner of Spring Arbor Township would bring in Blackman Township. But we wouldn't ask Blackman to go down to our southwest corner, nor would we ask Pulaski to come up to our northeast corner. So again, trying to better utilize the system and the resources that we have. This software, we did a webinar back in September of this last year. Several of the fire chiefs were in on it. And there's a lot more than just the dispatch. This will also, if we have a fire truck, again, I'll use the example of Spring Arbor. If our aerial truck is in the city of Jackson and we have a fire in Spring Arbor Township, this software through the computer system will already say, what's the next aerial? If my aerial's out of service, either it's in service in the city of Jackson or it's broke down, automatically it will move the next closest aerial up to that card system. So that on an initial dispatch, whether it's me or my brand new firefighter, he doesn't have to make that decision. That decision will automatically upgrade as trucks go in and out of service. Special events. Columbia Township has a great event 4 or 5 times a year. I think it's great because it's in Columbia, but that's faster horses, that's the car, the racetrack. You can set up special response for those events that take that human factor out through pre-planning and provide a system for handling those large-scale events in Jackson County. So the chiefs have looked at it, the chiefs have looked at this. We feel very confident that this is the best way. Steve had mentioned, and we talked about the card system. That's going to be heavily dependent on the dispatchers. And they have to go through, some of these cards are up to, systems are up to 21 cards per jurisdiction. So they have to find the card that best matches what they are hearing on the radio, instead of asking a few questions on the computer. Is it a structure fire? They hit the structure fire button, drop down. Now their choices just went from 20 cards down to 5 cards. The next question they ask, is this residential or is this commercial? Click, commercial. Now we're down to 2 cards. And it's just a great management system. It's something that I think we need. And I urge the board to consider it. The Fire Chiefs Association, back in December, we had set aside some money for a fire investigation of $5,700. The Fire Chiefs Association, which is a nonprofit 501c4 organization, we would like to put what money we can into this, and we'd like to offer that as some matching funds. We've also have applied, back in August, we applied for a grant to cover the full cost of this. We were notified in the end of November that we were not successful to that. And continuing on now, we are trying to find funding anywhere we can. But felt like it was time to come to the board. The townships have voted, most townships, not 100%, but most townships have voted and have approved a resolution for MABUS. We're just waiting to activate this, and we'd like to do it as soon as possible.
Thank you, gentlemen. I've had some correspondence with you too. And obviously, I've taken so far, initially anyway, is certainly this, as you have said, this would be more efficient, more effective, and certainly from a safety standpoint, which is huge, this would be a better system. It also would help out with the fact that we've already talked about the fact that 911 is often burdened with workload, so it certainly sounds like it would help with that as well. My next question, though, is after the initial cost, let's say that this thing happens and the county steps forward with the 14,000 plus initially. After that, does the vendor take care of the maintenance and regarding the software? Is there any, on an annual basis, is there going to be a certain fee that the county is going to have to be responsible for?
The vendor does take care of everything from that point forward, but there is an ongoing maintenance for that package of $4,800 per year. So that would be an appropriate use of probably surcharge money, and we do have money in the budget to do that. So I don't see that as a huge burden for us. But it does require, obviously, board action because it would be ongoing, and the $20,000 figure for initial startup.
All right, thank you, Sheriff.
I'm sorry, what was the number?
$4,800 annually.
Please.
I had the chance of sitting in at two different township meetings. One very supportive of the system, the other asked some different questions about agencies that currently don't participate in mutual aid. Will this drag them into the mutual aid system, or if they're, and it's more of a political issue in a couple of townships right now. And I would like the protection to be there for our residents, okay? And the concern that I have is that will agencies, can they be brought along later, or can they be brought in right now, and is there a way to kind of cajole them or get them more positive towards being involved in this?
Okay. There is countywide mutual aid. We have a signed countywide mutual aid agreement that all 15 fire departments and all 19 townships currently support and have since the earliest records I can find from John Warden, the keeper of all things fire in the past, is about 1953 is when that document was put in place, and it's been renewed over the years. So presently, we have mutual aid countywide, which means Spring Arbor, if asked by Grass Lake and has the right resources, we would go to Grass Lake and vice versa. The new term that kind of came into place in 2005 was automatic mutual aid. That's where in mutual aid, you're supposed to use up your resources first before calling for your neighbor's resources. Automatic aid changed that. And there's 3 automatic aid agreements in Jackson County right now, an east side, the city and Summit, and then the southwest side of Jackson County. And what that means is on a structure fire in Spring Arbor Township, automatically 3 other townships get that call the same time as Spring Arbor. So they're automatically. So we've entered into an enhancement of the mutual aid. What I see as Mabus would kind of probably take away that automatic aid, maybe not initially, but what it would do, it would enhance the original mutual aid to say, at the fire chief and the township's discretion, here's who we would like to invite to the fire on a first round basis. If they choose on their card not to, if Spring Arbor Township said, we're not going to invite anybody, they can certainly do that. They can design their card that way. Or they can say, send me the next 2 closest. And then when you get there and the world's blowing up and you're having a very bad day, you can simply say over the radio, give me a second alarm or a third alarm. The dispatcher looks at her screen or his screen and says, this is what Spring Arbor has determined a second alarm and a third alarm looks like, and they automatically dispatch that. And again, some of the beauty of this particular software is if on my second alarm card I have the tanker out of Parma and it's out of service, it automatically says, oh, Parma's tanker's out of service, I need to get Concord's tanker, and it will dispatch Concord instead of Parma. So again, it's a system that's I think would work very well. To my knowledge, inside of the fire service, there are a couple of chiefs that have taken a wait and see approach. They said, we will participate, and anybody who wants us to be on their card system, we're just not going to develop our card system till we see how this goes. And so they're taking a slow approach. And Mabus, there is no requirement to have 100% participation, although I suspect that very quickly we will have 100% participation.
One other observation, doesn't it also assist in the reduction of insurance ratings also for residents?
That is one of the key, if you are a Mavis County, when ISO comes in and does their ratings of your fire department, that helps. Any of your agreements that you have, advanced agreements, will help bring that number down. It's based on a lot of things, water, manpower, equipment, but truly having mutual aid has helped us in the past. Having automatic mutual aid has helped us, and this Mavis will help us even more.
Any other questions, concerns, or otherwise? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Any other items that commissioners would like to bring up? Seeing none, we've arrived at the second public comment.
I have a friend who is a firefighter down in Chicago. They have utilized this system, this Mavis system, for a considerable amount of time in the township he resides in. And he is very enthusiastic about it and says it's been a very good system for them down there. So I just did a little research when I saw this on the agenda item. I'm not personally familiar with it. I'm counting on his recommendation, and therefore I offer my support for the proposal. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, commissioner comments?